Hello everybody. Isn't this exciting? The second Beckett Festival in Liverpool. And first of all, I want to thank Jerry and Viola for all the really hard work they've put together. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people coming over the next few days, and it really is important. Adrian Dunbar, for those of you who listen to Radio 4, was on the programme, which has now gone completely out of my head. Front row, talking about the event and the festival. So basically, we're very delighted to work with Unreal Cities. Where's Nick? Hi, Nick. And it's actually interesting how this came about. Adrian Dunbar and I were sitting in a bar having a drink. So whenever senior members of staff at the university ask you, how did you strategize things? Two Irish members sitting in a pub, and one said to the other, I'm looking for a place to take Beckett. And I foolishly said, I know where you can take it. Take it to us. So that's why it's here. And, of course, it's critically important the way in which this is presented in the terms we go out to community, where, that this is not the liberal elite type approach to these events. And it's really, really so meaningful for us to take culture to other places. We've also got Keough-Naughton here, and one of our partners is Notre, and we're very, very pleased to have them as a partner. We also receive funding from Cultural Ireland, the T.S. Eliot Foundation, the Rimmer Trust, and the Martin Trust. So, you're all here because you know a bit about Beckett. And when my father went into a home with Parkinson's disease, I asked the nurse what this room was that was sort of locked away in the corner, and she said, that's waiting for Godot. And she went, it'll be a time before your father was in there. And I was going, this is not particularly comforting. And I said, Samuel Beckett. And she went, who's Samuel Beckett? And I just thought, if you're somebody who's created a term which is in common parlance, but they don't know who that person was who created the term, that shows you how globally significant you actually are. And of course, many of us will know Beckett is the great trickster, because you go in to watch a piece by Beckett and people are wearing rags and people are dystopian and people are drawing on the horrors and the issues of life. But when you come out, you sort of feel uplifted. And you feel a sense that there is something innate in life which is good. And I think that's one of the reasons why his work has been so popular. But we have somebody who knows a lot more about this than me, okay? And it's your second time with us, isn't it? Yes. You're not good, you're just cheap. It's a common Belfast thing that people say. So, Hannah, you're very welcome yet again. Hannah is at Edinburgh University. She's studying lots of very prestigious and wonderful places. And I was looking today at Hannah's work, and I can just see the synergies with what we do here at the Institute, which is trying to look at the whole way in which art can be used to reconcile and how art can be used to provide meaning and understanding. So, Alex, I'm sure we'll chat to you about that and the things that he's trying to do as well. So, let's kick the festival off with a round of applause for Hannah and welcome her to the Institute.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here today to celebrate the opening of the Beckett Unbound Festival. Although I understand that I'm actually Liverpool's warm-up act to Taylor Swift, which is fine. I mean, our work is very similar in many. I'd like to thank the organisers, and especially Nick, Jerry and Viola, who have done a lot of work behind the scenes on my behalf in particular. My name is Dr. Hannah Simpson. I'm a lecturer in drama and performance at the University of Edinburgh. I'm going to speak today for about 45 minutes and leave time for questions and discussions afterwards. And please do feel free to use the room as you wish during this time. I've no problem with you moving about or in and out of the room if that makes you comfortable. And I'm delighted to be here to speak with you about new directions in Beckett Performance today, particularly since the schedule of events ahead of us this weekend promise to showcase a real range of innovative, new and recent work in this area. I'll be discussing how Beckett's own history as an artist who experimented constantly with different media and how this has inspired a new generation of medium experimentation in today's artists and theatre makers. After discussing the importance of medium in Beckett's work, I'll look at the history of the radio play All at Fall and some recent adaptations of it as one case study. And then I'll broaden out to think about dance adaptations and site-specific performance before opening up the floor for further questions and conversation. And I'll apologise now for my breath control today. I'm 3 months pregnant. It's left me very breathless. So if you hear me run out of steam at the end of the sentence, I'll get back to it. I'll pick it up again. I think it's important to begin by speaking directly to this question of Beckett and innovation, because there's a pervasive popular myth that Beckett's work doesn't lend itself to innovation in our contemporary performance landscape. Beckett's own much mythologized persona as a demandingly precise director of his own plays has contributed to this. The idea that any Beckett play must be performed with minutely observed exactitude and exactly how it was done before, as in later years has the Beckett estate's reputation for refusing to license or stepping in to shut down productions that do not adhere to the original script's text, casting, or stage directions. And Beckett has, after all, now become canonical, mainstream. His plays are frequent West End and Broadway showcases, vehicles for celebrity performance, and commonly assigned high school and university texts. So how innovative can we actually be here? And yet this mythology goes against the very real fact that Beckett was one of the great, perhaps the greatest of the creative experimenters of the 20th century. Beckett's body of work demonstrates his compulsive interest in finding new ways of communicating, both within and beyond the printed word. And he's constantly experimenting with different media and the potentialities and the limitations of these media across his career. He writes in pretty much every medium that's available to him at some point, and often media that's at the technological forefront of his day. Prose and stage drama, of course, but also poetry, mime, radio, television, film, and I would argue in the case of Quad, dance. It's hard to think of many other creative figures who have had so much success across such a wide range of media. And it's very specifically Beckett's interest in communication and different forms of communication that drives this experimentation. If Beckett was a writer famously aware of the limitations of written and verbal communication, this also makes him an artist who experiments with different sensory systems of understanding, different sensory modes of perception. His experiments with different media are often linked to his probing how different affective, bodily and emotional states of being can communicate an experience beyond the merely cognitive. What can be communicated via theatre that can't be communicated via prose, for example? What audience experience can be created by radio that can't be created by theatre? And what does this experience communicate? How does that audience experience parallel or illuminate the concerns of the text itself? So, for example, in 1963, French writer Alain Robbe-Grillet famously described Beckett's theatre as, at heart, concerned with the condition of being there. The condition of man, says Heidegger, is to be there. The theatre probably reproduces this situation more naturally than any of the other ways of representing reality. The essential thing about a character in a play is that he is on the scene, there. We suddenly realise, as we look at Beckett's characters, the main function of theatre, which is to show what the fact of being there consists in. I think this is very true of Beckett's theatre, which is so concerned with underlining the bodily fact of being in time and space, actor or character, and audience together. We, as spectators, sit in the room witnessing these onstage figures and, at some level, demanding that they perform for us. These are theatre plays that are about theatre and about the forms of surveillance or complicity or interpersonal dynamics that are enacted in that theatre space. In Beckett's early stage plays, characters refer directly to the theatre space. In later plays, theatre apparatus turns ominously on the characters themselves. In both Waiting for Godot and Endgame, the onstage characters refer directly to the fact that they are on the stage in a play. In Godot, Vladimir's directions to the toilet are end of the corridor on the left, through the wings, and he asks Vladimir to keep my seat, for example. In Endgame, we have the constant meta-theatrical reminders that we are in a theatre. What is it that keeps me here? The dialogue. Did you never hear of an aside before? I'm warming up for my last soliloquy. And Clove's telescope is, like Estragon's own gaze, turned mockingly on the audience themselves. In later stage plays, the theatre itself turns on the characters. The spotlight that tortures the onstage figures into frantic performance in play, or in Happy Days, the bell that rings to signal the beginning of each act in traditional theatre, magnified into an agonising shriek that hurts Winnie's ears, and again the spotlight that burns her skin. And of course, in both these plays too, the characters know they are being watched, refer to their watchers, resent their watchers. And we can trace these compelled performances right up to Beckett's last plays in No Higher Impromptu and Catastrophe and What Where. This is very much theatre that is about theatre. These are plays that push the audience member into recognising their own bodily experience of waiting, of being trapped in a room with others, or that turn the audience's expectant gaze back on itself, asking exactly what it is we are complicit in as spectators. And this overlap of medium and textual concern is why it's so important when we think about Beckett's individual works to think about why he's chosen the medium in question for them. This is a man who can select from across writing in prose, poetry, radio, film, television, etc. So why has he chosen this medium for this work? What is it that can be achieved or what can be probed in this medium that wouldn't be possible otherwise? Or, to put it another way, what kind of experience can be produced that otherwise couldn't be? And when we're thinking about Beckett and innovation, we should recognise that Beckett not only experiments with a range of different media, he also pushes forward the boundaries of the medium itself. He gives us prose that does something new, theatre that does something new, and so on. But crucially, this experimentation is often not done by subverting or reinventing the traditional qualities of the medium in question, but by focusing on them, heightening them. Joseph O'Leary points out how Beckett typically amplifies or even parodies the characteristics of whatever medium he's working in. Beckett exaggerates the typical traits of whatever medium he tackles so that his writing is hyper-theatrical, hyper-mime-like, hyper-radiophonic, hyper-tape-recorded, hyper-cinematic, hyper-televisual. Thus, he signals the limits of the medium in its conventional forms at the same time as he wrings from it new potential. The hyper of parody becomes the self-reflexive meta that makes the performance a representation of the medium itself as such. So we have prose that calls attention to itself as prose, theatre that calls attention to itself as theatre, television that calls attention to itself as television, and so on. And Beckett extends this exploratory attention to the precise functioning of a specific medium in the moments when he turns away from theatre as well. Beckett's radio plays offer one example of Beckett working at the forefront of media technology of his time and probing its specific capabilities. If theatre is the medium of being there, then radio is the medium of not being there, the disembodied voice that comes from some undefined location into our homes. Beckett begins working for the radio relatively early in its development as a cultural medium. In 1933, the BBC began an international programme of public broadcasting, primarily focused on daily news bulletins. But by the 1940s, writers and artists were increasingly aware of the radio as a site for potential creative exploration, heralded by the launch of the BBC Third programme in 1946, which aimed to introduce new experimentations in culture and the arts to its listeners, broadcasting literary works by writers such as Dylan Thomas, Philip Larkin, and Harold Pinter. And Beckett begins writing for the Third programme in 1956, during the first decade of its functioning, when they commissioned the play All at Fall, which recounts the mystery of Dan Rooney's delayed train from the perspective of his wife, Maddie Rooney, who has laboriously travelled to the station to meet him. For context, Beckett writing a radio play in 1956 is roughly equivalent to a playwright working with virtual reality or augmented reality theatre today in terms of working with a new technological medium, if we date virtual reality theatre being feasibly available for commercial theatre to around 2015 with the release of the Oculus Rift, or more realistically to 2019 with the release of the MetaQuest 1. He's very early in experimenting with radio. And when Beckett starts to write All at Fall, we can see that he's immediately engaged in thinking about the radio as its own specific medium, with its own specific potentials and limitations. After speaking with John Cunard, controller of the third programme, Beckett writes to Nancy Cunard, "Never thought about radio play technique, but in the dead of t'other night got a gruesome idea full of cartwheels and dragging feet and puffing and panting, which may or may not lead to something." And a couple of days later, he writes to Aidan Higgins, "Have been asked to write a radio play for the third, and am tempted, feet dragging and breath short, and cartwheels and imprecations from the Brighton Road to Foxrock Station and back." What we might note in these two letters is that Beckett is thinking specifically about the radio medium as an opportunity to play with sound. And I mean sound here specifically rather than voice, the material sound of bodies and objects. He's not contemplating a monologue play or just a recording of one of his prose pieces. He's immediately interested in sound effect, and particularly this question of how to render bodies and objects via the radio recording, this technically disembodied medium. During production, and Beckett was very closely involved with rehearsals and the technical side of production for All at Fall, Beckett was particularly concerned about the artificial quality of the sound effects. That is, he was concerned that they do sound artificial. He wants it underlined to the listener at home that they are hearing something artificial, recorded, constructed. Hence, we get very strange sound effects throughout the script. For example, all is still, no living soul in sight. There is no one to ask. The world is feeding. The wind, brief wind, scarcely stirs the leaves, and the birds, brief chirp, are tired singing. The cows, brief moo, and sheep, brief baa, ruminate in silence. The dogs, brief bark, are hushed, and the hens, brief cackle, sprawl torpid on the dust. Even on the page, the timing of these effects highlight their scripted nature. These sounds appear exactly as they are summoned, too neatly and too suddenly for exact verisimilitude. The impression we get is less of real farm animals existing around Maddie, and more the image of the radio sound engineer rifling through his or her library of sound effects and then hovering over the right button, waiting for the cue to press each one in turn. But Beckett pushes this still further. He writes to producer Donald McWhinney, "The absurd apropos with which these sound effects occur and their briefness are enough to denaturalize them. And if not, could they be distorted by some technical means?" And this is exactly what he would end up doing. Martin Eslin, originator of the term the theatre of the absurd, but then the assistant head of the BBC's radio drama department, Martin Eslin explains, "Beckett's script demanded a degree of stylized realism hitherto unheard of in radio drama, and new methods had to be found to extract the sounds needed from the simple naturalism of the hundreds of records in the BBC effects library. Desmond Briscoe and his gramophone operator, Norman Baines, had to invent ways and means to remove these sounds from the purely realistic sphere. They did so by treating them electronically, slowing down, speeding up, adding echo, fragmenting them by cutting them into segments, and putting them together in new ways. These experiments and the discoveries made as they evolved led directly to the establishment of the BBC's radiophonic workshop. Beckett and All That Fall thus directly contributed to one of the most important technical advances in the art of radio and the technique and indeed technology of radio in Britain. So All That Fall revolves around the technical problems of the medium. It is a radio play very much concerned with the medium of radio itself, emphasizing and exaggerating some of its key characteristics and highlighting what we might think of as its limitations. Beckett calls recurrent attention to the artistic construction of his radio play, carefully undermining any acoustic realism that the radio medium is capable of producing. But why, we might ask, is Beckett so intent on calling our attention to the constructed nature of what we hear in All That Fall? Well, crucially, I think it aligns with the larger issue of unreliable or uncertain perception in the play. And I'm going to try and avoid any plot spoilers here for anyone who hasn't seen the play or heard the play and is booked to see it this weekend. I'll just say that I'm thinking of the question of Dan and the child on the train as the central unresolved mystery that the play refuses to answer. Radio forces us to depend solely on our sense of hearing, twinned with our imagination and logical decoding of what we hear to construct a fuller picture, as it were, of this ostensible reality that we're listening to. And Beckett insistently troubles any faith we might have in our ability to neatly or securely perceive any objective reality here in a play in which larger questions of perception and knowledge are constantly troubled. Beckett uses the radio medium to speak very directly to this issue of uncertain perception with which its characters grapple, pushing the listener into sharing this same uncertainty. Crucial here is the invisibility of the radio medium, the fact that as listeners we rely on what we hear to establish the details of what we cannot see for ourselves. All at Fall includes many moments that call the listener's attention to the fact that they do not know anything of these bodies beyond the sounds they produce. They disappear for us perceptually when they stop making sounds or speaking. Look at this relatively early moment, for example, when Maddie is talking on the side of the road to Mr. Tyler, who has been a very vocal, physical presence for us since his first appearance. He rings his bell, his bike brakes squeak, he talks loudly and volubly. Sound of motor van. It approaches, passes with thunderous rattles, recedes. Are you all right, Mr. Tyler? Where is he? Ah, there you are. The dragging steps resume. That was a narrow squeak. I alit in the nick of time. In these moments of silence, Mr. Tyler completely disappears for the listener. We have absolutely no sense of where or how he is in the aftermath of Connolly's van. As the silences extend, we're caught in this disorienting instant of running imaginatively through the various ways in which we might be asked to visualize him now. Has he been knocked down by the van? Is he unconscious, dead, simply fled? Or else simply not knowing how to visualize him at all, confronted by the blank space that lurks behind the words and sounds of the radio play, until he suddenly reappears for us via first Mrs. Rooney's and then his own words. But our sense of his existence and any certainty or clear perception we might have had of his existence has been shaken, has been destabilized. We're back again to how Beckett constructs a parallel between medium and content in his works. This is how unstable our understanding of this whole play world is, how dissociated from any reliable empirical evidence that might confirm our understanding of it. And Dan's role in All At Fall generates a larger and more unsettling question of uncertain perception or uncertain knowledge. Did he do that thing on the train that we sort of suspect he did, but cannot know for certain? And this undecidability is deliberate and crucial. It's a summation of this play that has repeatedly underlined to us the unstable, unreliable nature of our own perception of the world. The play gives us a murder mystery narrative, but it's a murder mystery that refuses all possibility of solution, of neatly resolved discovery and understanding of the world around us that most detective fiction does give us. There's a very neat cohesion here between Beckett's probing of our limited perceptual sense of the quote-unquote reality around us and the radio medium itself. Now, I've talked about All At Fall in some length because recent productions of this radio play offer some really intriguing examples of how contemporary theatre makers are responding with renewed innovation to Beckett's work, and specifically the staging of the play and the fact that the Beckett estate has permitted these stagings offer really valuable case studies for thinking more rigorously about exactly what degree of innovation Beckett's work permits or even encourages. During his lifetime, Beckett famously refused several requests to translate his works from one medium to another. Here he is writing to Barney Rossett in August 1957 in response to one such request. All At Fall is specifically a radio play, or rather radio text, for voices, not bodies. I am absolutely opposed to any form of adaptation with a view to its conversion into theatre. Even the reduced visual dimension it will receive from the simplest and most static of readings will be destructive of whatever quality it may have, and which depends on the whole thing's coming out of the dark. Now, this directive is understandable for a writer who, as we've seen, is so attentive to the question of medium and what it allows him to do. But Beckett's care over the precise functional qualities of a chosen medium has led to this mythology about Beckett's resistance to any form of experimentation or innovation with his works, and particularly to any experimentation with their medium. And this very famous letter excerpt in particular, which is often quoted in these arguments, has been very poorly interpreted, I think. Many people have read it far too partially, as if Beckett had simply written that he is opposed to any form of adaptation. But what Beckett is very specifically saying here is, of All at Fall, is that he's opposed to any form of adaptation with a view to its conversion to theatre. He's resisting something very particular here. He's refusing something very particular here. Not the question of adaptation per se, but adapting All That Fall to a too visual medium that will stop it coming out of the dark. Anything that destroys the perceptual ambiguity that is so crucial to the play's functioning. And again, here's where it's important to think about Beckett's original choice of medium, especially when medium swappers, whether as scholars or practitioners, what is the medium doing that needs to be recognised and reproduced in some way? Any adaptation that doesn't recognise this crucial element of All at Fall will inevitably be a very poor version of the play and far more likely to be disallowed by the Beckett estate. But some very successful productions have found really innovative ways to stage this play and retain this perceptual doubt over its bodies and its action. And it's worth saying here that the Beckett estate has licensed a lot of really smart and innovative translations of Beckett's work from one medium to another. Garth Saint-Lazare Ireland's astonishing theatre staging of How It Is, along with many of Beckett's other prose pieces, for example, or Pan Pan Theatre's staging of radio play Cascando as a binaural recording that spectators listen to as they move through a theatre set or outdoor space. And of course, we have examples of Beckett working on medium translations of his own texts during his lifetime, such as the rendering of the theatre plays Not I and What Where as television plays. And just as Beckett's radio plays are not simply recorded prose, Not I and What Where in their television versions are not simply recorded theatre plays, the way we might get on National Theatre Live, for example, but rather become something new and medium-specific under Beckett's translations. But I digress. To return to All at Fall and its contemporary stagings, Pan Pan Theatre are an Irish theatre company working across the boundaries of experimental theatre and live performance, and they toured their stage production of All at Fall from 2011 to 2016. And this is a fascinating example of medium swapping that really pays attention to the requirements of the text itself. This is a staging of All at Fall that does not turn it into theatre, as per Beckett's letter. I'm going to play you this 3-minute trailer to give you a sense of how this production works.
Poor woman, all alone in that ruinous old house. What have I done to deserve all this? What? So long ago. No. Sigh out to something tale of things done long ago and ill done. How can I go on?
So although the audience are gathered together as for a live theatre show here, there are still no visible bodies attached to the character voices. The dialogue and soundscape are pre-recorded and played via a series of very visible speakers. The speakers themselves act as a visual reminder of the recorded, distanced, invisible quality of what we hear. The perceptual ambiguity of the action remains. What also maybe isn't so obvious from the trailer is how disorienting this experience of listening in this setting is as well. The soundscape is coming from various alternating directions through the different speakers. And it wasn't uncommon to see audience members twisting in their seats to double check that the source of the sound wasn't coming from behind them. It was very easy to forget that you were listening to speakers, that there weren't figures around you. So you had these heightened moments of realizing your own perceptual uncertainty and remembering the absence of the bodies you were hearing. And this was especially disorienting when you turned round expecting to see a car or a specific figure and you find yourself looking at a different audience member instead. Another intriguing recent staging of All That Fall was Mouth on Fire's 2019 production, staged first in Tullow Church in Foxrock, Beckett's childhood church, and Foxrock is where the play is set, of course. And then at the residence of the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, pictured here with his wife Sabrina, who is herself a former actor. He did, by all accounts, have a better time than he looks like he's having in this picture. He was very complimentary anyway. In the Tullow Church performance, spectators sat in the church pews facing actors, musicians and sound effect technicians who were visible in the chancel. And you'll note that there's no attempt here to hide the working nature of the staging. The actors aren't dressed as characters and the sound technician and equipment are all clearly visible. The setup looks more like a recording studio than a stage set. Once everyone was seated, spectators were then asked to put on the blindfold eye mask that they'd been given on entry, and the play was performed in its entirety while the spectators were blindfolded. Live dialogue and the noise of human actions were performed through the stage microphones with recorded animal and vehicle sound effects. The audience thus listened to All That Fall in its entirety without being able to see anything. The play did very literally come out of the dark as Beckett desired. And this is one of the reasons I'm excited to see the festival's production of All That Fall at Toxteth Reservoir this weekend. I obviously can't discuss this in much detail. It's a world premiere. I haven't seen it. But I did see 2 years ago, festival production of Catastrophe at the Reservoir. And my sense is that the really odd sightlines of that venue and the incredibly heightened and disorienting acoustics of the echoing space are going to really lend themselves to an All That Fall that plays in a new but very appropriate way with our perceptual abilities. I only have 15 minutes left, so I want to touch more briefly on two other really intriguing trends that we're seeing in contemporary Beckettian performance, which speak as well to some of the work that we're seeing at this festival, dance and site-specific performance. I alluded earlier to the fact that I think we should include dance as one of the media with which Beckett worked, because Quad is very much a dance play as well as a television play, originally cast with Stuttgart ballet dancers. As the printed casting notes direct, some ballet training is desirable for anyone who takes on one of these player roles. Quad is almost entirely dependent on the functioning of the emotional affect of the moving human body, which is one way we might define dance performance. And Susan Jones' research has revealed just how immersed Beckett was in 20th century European dance world and his knowledge of modern ballet in particular. And although I wouldn't go so far as to call them dance plays, I'd point to Ohio Impromptu and Catastrophe in particular among Beckett's work as being themselves entirely dependent at their climax on the movement and positioning of the human body to produce an affective communication that goes beyond language, that is very specifically incommunicable in other ways. Beckett scholars trying to write about the meaning of these bodily movements, to translate the bodily communication into something neatly verbal, often inevitably falls short, and I include my own scholarship there as well. So it's entirely appropriate, I think, that we're seeing dance really blossoming as a medium in which contemporary practitioners are responding to Beckett's work and its own increasingly minimalistic yet precise choreography. French choreographer Magai Marin's May Be premiered in 1981 after Beckett himself gave Marin his blessing to produce a dance adaptation of his works. Some of you may have caught one of the performances at Sadler's Wells in London earlier this month. Here's a short minute-long trailer. Marin pulls together some recognisable Beckettian tropes, the nag and nail-esque nightgowns, the play-like caked makeup, the ageing figures, and the Schubert music. But it's the communication through movement and bodily gesture, the kinesthetic affect, where maybe most intriguingly mirrors Beckett's work. We find slow playing out of the banal, the flashes of humour that bubble up from these stumbling, exile lost in the dark figures, their refusal of stillness fighting against the entropic winding down, and the vulnerable intimacy of these figures played out against their stoic, messy endurance. And of course, we're on the brink of being able to watch the world premiere of Liz Roach's dance piece Sentient, commissioned for the festival. I think there are tickets remaining for tonight and tomorrow. Don't ask me. Yep, there are. Here is the trailer. Roach tells us that the work takes inspiration from a line in Beckett's novel Malloy. I often thought of my bees, and I thought above all of their dance, for my bees danced in a different way. Roach has followed scholars like Angela Murjani and Julie Bates in tracing this line to Beckett's reading and note-taking from ethologist Carl von Frisch's 1927 book, The Dancing Bees, which described how honeybees communicate astonishingly precise information about the surrounding environment through their dance movements. Turning to dance is a wonderfully apt response to work such as Beckett's, which is itself so musically rhythmic and precisely choreographed, and so profoundly intrigued by the functioning and the misfunctioning of the human body as a medium of communication. So I'm looking forward to seeing where Sentient takes us. Finally, I want to end by gesturing at the very rich history that is developing in site-specific performance of contemporary productions of and responses to Beckett's work. And by site-specific performance, I mean productions that engage directly with the histories that shape the site of staging, that draw both actors and audience into material and often political realities that inscribe that site. This isn't just performance that happens outside the traditional theatre space. It's performance that maps the spatial politics of the site in conversation with the playtext and the audience themselves. And again, it's not surprising, I think, that we're seeing some really generative new site-specific work taking place in restagings or adaptations of Beckett's writing, given how closely Beckett's work itself is engaged with questions of space and place, of the individual's response to their own environment, and the question of Beckett's own nationality as well, Irish, Franco-Irish, Francophone, and the way that those countries have rejected and celebrated him at various stages. For the sake of time, I just want to speak today on the work of contemporary Irish theatre company SJ, run by Sarah Jane Scaife, which specialises in site-specific productions of Irish plays. And I want to look at one of Company SJ's site-specific productions of Beckett's work, the 2009 and 2014 productions of Act Without Words 2, and how they set Beckett's work in conversation with our own political landscape. Important here is the context of contemporary Ireland, in which economic segregation has become one of the nation's most pressing and divisive issues. We're living in the aftermath of the Celtic Tiger, economic boom, collapse, and catastrophic financial recession. Now, even during the Celtic Tiger years, economic inequalities were stark in Ireland as the neoliberal state prioritised low corporate tax over social welfare. As economist Timothy White notes, in the same years as the Celtic Tiger boom, Ireland's poverty rate, the ratio number of people living in poverty, remained one of the highest in the European Union. And these inequalities became still starker and more urgent following the financial crash, when the Irish government rescued several banks, by raising money through severe taxation of the Irish public and by cutting social welfare funding still further. Salaries dropped, a young workforce emigrated in large numbers, and many were left homeless. In fact, the homeless population in Ireland has tripled in the past decade, with an associated rise in problems with addiction. So if deprivation and dispossession and emigration have been staples of Irish cultural narratives for many centuries, there's a new contemporary surge in the lived reality of these conditions for many citizens. Company SJ's work speaks directly to this contemporary political reality. Sarah Jane Scaife was born and raised in Ireland to a family that has lived there since the 19th century, but she spent the years 2000 to 2009 staging Beckett's plays in several Asian countries, and returned home to Dublin at the end of the Celtic Tiger boom. Alongside public protests over the lack of social welfare provided by the Irish state, she also witnessed how the recently published Ryan report made public horrific detail about the context of child abuse in Irish institutions over the past century. Scaife reflects on how it felt like the whole country was this big wound that nobody acknowledged at home. You felt bad about yourself, or you felt guilty all the time, and you did not really know what it was. I call this Irish body the grieving body. It can be seen all around you as you walk through the streets of Dublin, in the skeletal grey faces of addicts and the red, raw faces of the alcoholic population, many of whom are also homeless. Searching for a way to engage with this vision of Ireland, Scaife turned to staging site-specific performances of Beckett's plays, with their recurrent focus on broken yet enduring indigent figures. Everywhere I walked in Dublin, she says, I saw Beckett's characters around me. Thus, Company SJ began their long-running mid-2000s project, Beckett in the City, which staged a number of Beckett short plays in various neglected non-theatre spaces. The project began with an on-the-street production of Beckett's very short 1956 play, Act Without Words 2, which is a wordless mime play for two players, A and B. At the beginning, both are curled up in sacks. Each is then prodded with a long pole which appears from offstage, prompting them to emerge and complete their daily routines. A is slow, awkward, and absent according to the stage directions. He broods, prays, broods, takes some pills, broods some more. B is brisk, rapid, and precise, checking his watch, doing his daily exercise, checking his watch again, scrubbing his teeth vigorously, checking his watch. The two figures are both getting through the same day in their own ways, and yet each ends up back in their sack at the end, regardless of their different activities. And since Beckett provides no further details on character or setting, it's often staged in quite an abstract, stripped-down style, as you can see on screen here. This is a 2014 American production directed by David Fox. But Keough explains that on her return to a recession-blighted Dublin, I began to see Act Without Words 2 as the two opposites of Ireland, the two ways in Ireland of coping with the wound. The prayer, the people who looked outside of themselves to this higher power, and the ones who drank or took drugs to escape. One character is getting out of his head on religion and pills, the other is focused on making it. There are people who are obsessed with making it in the world, and the people who want to absent themselves from this world. So the Beckett in the City productions of Act Without Words 2 presented these characters as homeless men sleeping on the streets, their sleeping bags replacing their original sacks, and their movements evoking the habits and symptoms of addicted bodies. The 2009 production was staged in St John's Lane by Christ Church Cathedral, which is adjacent to a methadone clinic just off Grafton Street, and beside a park that serves as a popular sleeping area for homeless people in the city. So the performances did often take place in visible proximity to other figures sleeping rough in similar setups, and audience members typically did have to walk past rows of homeless people in order to get to and leave the performance. The 2013 production was staged in the dilapidated Dublin City Quay car park, right beside and in very stark contrast to the shining buildings of Dublin's adjacent financial quarter. So the company ASJ, Act Without Words 2, called attention to Dublin's homeless community, often overlooked in contemporary Irish cultural production and certainly in theatre attendance, while also staging a critique of the policies and priorities of Irish church and neoliberal state, and their failure to protect this growing segment of the Irish population. Company SJ site-specific productions take the experiences of marginalisation articulated in so many of Beckett's original play scripts and reinscribe them into the material reality of contemporary Irish life. I've only been able to speak to you about a small selection of some of the incredible range of contemporary experimentation that's happening in response to Beckett's writing today. I regret, for example, not being able to talk about some of the amazing work that's being done in disability performance by companies like Tourette's Hero and Culture Device, Irish language translation and performance of Beckett's plays, like Company SJ production of Beckett Sacré, Glahinta Sona, Happy Days, on Inisheer in the Aran Islands, the experiments in staging Beckett's work in virtual or augmented reality by practitioners like Nick Johnson and Hugh Farrell, and some of the astonishing political reworkings of Beckett's characters that we've recently seen in Antoinette Nwandu's harrowing Passover, for example, or Silent Face's wonderfully irreverent Godot is a Woman. I hope some scholars here today are working on some of these, and I'd love to hear more about it if you are. But what I hope I have managed to convey is how generatively artists and practitioners today are continuing Beckett's own exploration of modes of communication that push at the boundaries of their own form and their own media. Beckett's body of work is, of course, valuable in its own right, but another remarkable thing that it's gifted us is how it's still sparking new artistic creativity today in ways that this festival showcases so well. I hope we can all support and celebrate this intensely Beckettian legacy of creative experimentation that we're seeing in our own cultural landscape today. Thank you.
You know, it's always polite to say something's very good. That was very good. And the way I want to explain that to you, so our student ambassadors will have microphones, so prepare yourself for questions and they can turn the microphones on. So I'll waffle for a little bit, okay? Buy some time. But you have yourself, and then we have our intellectuals here. We have Nick who does production, direction, and all the creative work. I'm sure there are other people here as well. But for the rest of us, we are amateurs, okay? And I thought what you did there was it was very intellectual and very much part of your discipline, but it was also something that somebody the guy could understand. Okay, and I think it goes back like that Andy Warhol comment when people asked him what his art was, what it meant. He said, "What do you think?" So some of us are caught in the "this is what I think," whereas some of you know what it actually means. And I think that's the benefit of having conversations like this. And the thing I was thinking about during all of that is how Beckett actually disrupts. But it's not just disruption through content. It's disruption through, for example, the birds weren't singing. Yes, they are. Yeah? The cows aren't moving. Yes, they are. And when I saw that, it just was a disruption. It's like whenever your kids are young and you come home and you say, "Have you had chocolate?" "No." It's all over your face. Okay? It's a disruption. It stimulates memory. And I just thought the way in which you presented that in particular was the antithesis of the noises and the statements and the probes. And I think that just shows you the sort of genius behind all of this, because you couldn't actually walk out of seeing that, even just seeing it on a PowerPoint. It was sort of like there was no wind. There's whistling wind. The birds were tired. Well, they weren't singing. They're chirping. So whatever that was and however that works, but you just imagine that's how disruption works, because you're getting two senses, aren't you? You're getting the words and then you're getting the sounds. So that's what I really enjoyed about it. It made me think even more about all of this. So, have we any questions, please? This is like being in an interrogation centre with this big camera. Young Frank?
Yeah, thanks very much for a great talk, Hannah. You really teed up what we have to look forward to, and I'm really looking forward to the talks at Reservoir and all that fall after what you said. I wonder, could you say a little bit more about how all that fall came to be? You talked about it as being commissioned by the third programme. And I was interested in what Beckett was writing, in letters, in private letters about, well, I'm thinking I might do this, So was it something that he had been thinking about, or do you think it would simply not have come about had not someone from the third programme come and approached him?
I mean, I think, knowing about particularly Beckett's life in London, Beckett is very much, he's interested in the radio, he's listening to the radio, he's thinking about it. I actually think a lot of All That Fall, it sounds like I'm veering away and I hope I'm not here, but All That Fall does sit, I think, really strangely in Beckett's career at that point. He's going back to a very, very recognisable Irish setting. He's playing with this new medium. He is kind of playing with realism in a way that he hasn't for a while. Yes, it's very, it's very subverted realism, but it's closer to what he's been doing before. To me, there's actually a biographical resonance there with the very painful illness of his brother Frank and his death from cancer, because it is this return and this very sardonic, this very caustic return to Ireland, and the agnosticism that underlines that play, which is another sort of link to this uncertain perception, uncertain knowledge. Frank, who was a very devout Christian, who did attend Foxrock Church all his life, and had this terrible, terrible, agonising death that Beckett witnessed quite closely. And I think there's something there, to borrow your word, Pete, of disruption. There's something really intriguing there that actually sends Beckett on this slightly different path of this play in medium, but also in that turn back to very biographical, lots of biographical resonances, very Irish in a way that a lot of his work at that period is very deracinated, and very, very caustic. To me, the humour is a bit more like his early prose there.
There's somebody else in this area. Can you pass the mic behind you, Frankie, or on your right? Yes.
I'm just thinking about what you're talking about, form, and how in the letter to Barney Rossett, he's talking about there's a destructive element to even having the idea of the most static staging of All That Fall. Do you think that could refer to how the audience receives the play? For example, in a private space listening to the radio rather than in a public space at the theatre?
That's a really good point. And I think, that's sort of one of my memories of seeing that pan staging is the fact that, yes, it is communal, and it looks, I was going to try and flick back through the images, but I'm scared of setting a video off and not being able to get off it. It's quite sort of deceptively domestic. It's got the quite warm lights and the rocking chairs. It's like a very cozy living room that's multiplied. I actually find it, and maybe this says more about me, I find it a really quite unnerving space to be in, because you had that connection between the domestic but actually the very public. Maybe you could see in the images a lot of the rocking chairs, you know, they weren't set up like this nicely. You could orient to face each other, so on and so forth. And that's actually a really uncomfortable way of sitting, especially if you're not in a group of people. You know, you're sort of facing people and you don't really know them, and you're close enough that maybe you should talk, but you don't want to, etc. And very aware that they can see you during the performance, you can see their reactions, they can see yours. So I think it played really nicely, actually, with that kind of what could have been sort of communal and warm and intimate was actually really unsettling, really, you know, non-static, I suppose, in that sense. There's still a bigger divide there that's interesting to think about. I mean, the radio does come into our safe spaces in a way, doesn't our domestic home or, you know, our earphones, that doesn't quite match what I'm saying. But there was something interesting about the way they made it a very uncomfortable space, I thought, to listen in.
Hi. I'll keep it very short. I was curious, in the beginning, there was a reference to Heidegger in the first slide. I just was curious if that was, if there was any type of explicit influence that you could talk about on Beckett that he drew from Heidegger at all. Because I could understand through your presentation around the innovation aspect of technology, how there could be other sources within Heidegger that would influence an alienation, a feeling of alienation through the use of different mediums then.
This is why you shouldn't make a glancing reference to Heidegger in your presentation.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that.
Someone will pick up on it. I can't speak to that in any detail. I mean, I would be amazed if not, given that Stephen Matthews has published the philosophy notes, which are brilliant. They are literally just a replication of the notes that Beckett took while reading philosophy. So, you know, we know he read Heidegger. Stephen Matthews knows exactly what he read. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there was something specific in there, but I'm not going to bullshit you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That reminds me of the Adrian Dunbar interview in Radio 4, and the presenter said to him today, "So you said Beckett was the greatest writer ever?" Did I say that? It's the Irish memory. I say things for effect that I don't remember saying. Is there anybody else who has a question? Over here, please.
Hello.
And then if you take, is anybody else? Take one. Okay, so we'll take 1, 2, 3. We'll take them all together, is that okay?
Oh, no. Sorry.
Sorry, I've got the microphone up here for a question. Sorry, I'm just up here. Hi there. Yeah, thank you so much. I just is wonderful to be reminded of that really immersive sense of radio. I was thinking, like, in Ireland, I used to teach writing for radio. And just like the sense in which it was a collective, you know, like the golden age of radio in America, that sense of people gathering around something, and how that's transformed now for the generations of students that we have of what radio is really fascinating. I'm really looking forward to seeing the Beckett, as you say, in Liverpool. I've never seen Beckett in Liverpool, so it will be incredible to see that. I wondered, you know, because some of the plays are going to Paris as well, and I don't really have a sense of, you know, you talked about the influence, like all of these different stagings of Beckett now. Do you get a sense of the impact and influence of Beckett in Paris, in France, in innovative theatre? Is it still something that's really resonating in theatre, in radio, and dance as well in France?
My sense is that yes, although perhaps in a slightly different way than what we're seeing. To make a, you know, wildly sweeping generalisation, I think French theatre has always picked up on the bodily aspects, the mime aspects, that sort of avant-garde bodily element of Beckett's work, more so than perhaps British and Irish theatre have. Hugely generalised, obviously, in terms of those two histories there. I think one interesting thing that we're seeing in French theatre that we're perhaps not yet seeing so clearly here is because there is that tradition of incredibly strict, very, very strict French theatre genre boundaries in a way that were far stricter than ours. Racine's tragedies are tragedies. There's none of this here's a silly little comic character in Macbeth, the way Shakespeare does. And I think that has sort of led to right now, we're seeing contemporary French space where playing with genre is actually far more striking than it is perhaps here. And Beckett's work lends itself so well to that. If he's interested in form, he's profoundly interested in genre shifts, calling Godot a tragicomedy in a way that makes no sense by any of our sort of standard definitions of what tragicomedy is. To me, that's one of the interesting things that we're sort of seeing in French theatre as it responds to Beckett's work. There are probably other people in the room who could answer that for you as well.
So a microphone went there,
yeah? Yeah.
So we asked a question here and then final question.
Thank you. That was really interesting talk. Thank you so much. Beckett cultivated a striking public image, which you drew on to remind us of his, hawk-like features and spiky haircut. And I was thinking while you were running through the various media in which he worked, to what extent was Beckett himself a performer manqué? I think of Pinter being willing to write, having been an actor, appear in his own work, appear in Beckett's work.
Yeah.
And found a balance there. But I wonder if Beckett...
And we do have a very brief record of Beckett as an amateur performer when he's at Trinity College Dublin. I think as far as we know, that's the only production he ever acted in. I think there's something really intriguing there, and I mean, it kind of fits what I think about Beckett as a dramatist. I can imagine Beckett as a performer who hated performing, in the same way that I think his theatre is interesting because he is a theatre maker who isn't quite convinced about theatre. That's partly where I think a lot of that sort of really generative stuff comes. He's a person who understands the frustrations of theatre and the agony of being in a theatre audience sometimes when a play is boring or bad, etc. So there's something interesting there, perhaps, with that idea of him as a performer manqué that kind of touches on that idea of needing to perform. There's no way you can win the Nobel Prize and not perform to some degree or be forced to perform, and being very good at it, but good at it because he hates it, because he can push it, what he doesn't want to do, and the boundaries there. But that's a really interesting phrase. Thank you.
Thanks. You talked about a lot of new interpretations which would lead you to think that there's more accessibility for Beckett now, but do you think he was interested in accessibility, and which could be argued by all these different mediums, but maybe that might lend itself to him just being a bit more obscure, which a lot of people think he is?
I think the really glib answer is no, absolutely not. If they did it my way, they would empty the theatre. Certainly not being interested in a sort of straightforward success. But at the same time, for this, it's one of, again, the sort of mythologies about Beckett that annoys me, that this sort of, hates everything, doesn't believe in communication, etc. He kept writing. You don't keep doing it if you're not interested in an audience, in some sort of creative output, etc., etc. I think the less glib answer would be that I'm really interested personally in what is happening with Beckett's plays when other artists take them up. So, for example, my last book was on Beckett and disability performance. I don't think that Beckett was interested in a political sense in disability at all. I don't think he's thinking about access in that way whatsoever. But whenever you put those plays through the bodies and through the minds of disabled practitioners, without changing the script or without changing the stage directions, you do get something that is potentially politically aware and new. That sort of alchemy that happens when you take up the plays and don't change them, but put them in that new setting or the company SJ setting. That would be my slightly less glib answer there.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. You talked about Beckett being at the forefront of new medium and experimenting with it. How much would you say that he anticipated new medium that hadn't been invented yet, such as Krapp's Last Tape and the digital age?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do think with and I don't have a neat scholarly basis for it, I do think if Beckett had virtual reality, he would absolutely be playing with that. You know, I think that's, and to me it's not at all surprising that the estate is licensing virtual reality, augmented reality productions in that sense, because so much of that media, and I would put a lot of digital media in there, is really interested in questions of isolation and agency, audience complicity, in a way that I think it's made it really tricky to map some of that work onto plays that are doing something very specific with audience gaze already. Trying to change that is interesting. I think 100% yes, he would have been playing with every form of new digital media that we have, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.